In this video, I'm going to show you how I made this 28-inch base cabinet. It's made to hold 3 large drawers. Next week, I'll show you 3 different ways to build drawer boxes and how to install them. Hope you enjoy the video. Thanks. For this project, I just used one single sheet of Baltic birch plywood, 3/4 of an inch thick. Baltic birch, unlike normal plywood, comes in 5-foot by 5-foot sheets. We only need one sheet to build this 28-inch wide base cabinet. I already cut the sheet in half to get it down into my shop, and here I am cutting it to a 34.5-inch height with my track saw. Once I'm done cutting both of the side panels, I bring them over to my table saw, where I then rip them to 23.25 inches deep. 23.25 inches because we're going to put a 3/4 inch face frame on the front, and it'll give us a final cabinet depth of 24 inches, which is standard. Baltic birch ply is ideal for building cabinets. It's got a very thick veneer, which allows you to sand it thoroughly so you can get a great paint grade finish. Additionally, 3/4 inch Baltic birch ply has 13 plies, unlike construction grade plywood, which may only have 5 to 7. This is especially handy when you're running grooves such as dados or rabbets, because you get a much sturdier joint. You won't be able to get Baltic birch ply at your local home store. You'll have to find a hardwood dealer. You're going to pay a little more for it, but it's going to be of superior quality. Both the A and B sides will have a better face, and the interior will be free of voids. Once I ripped down all 3 panels, both the sides and the bottom panel, I took a scrap and cut down 4 4-inch wide strips. These will be used later on as 2 nailer strips for the back and also 2 stretchers for the top, which doesn't get a panel because it'll be covered with a countertop. Once I ripped down all those 4-inch pieces, I brought them over to the chop saw and cut them to the width of the inside dimension of the cabinet. The outside dimension is going to be 28 inches, and the 3/4 inch Baltic birch ply is really only 11/16 inches thick. So subtracting 1 3/8 inches from 28, I arrived at the inside dimension of the cabinet, which will be 26 5/8. If doing math like that is daunting to you, I'll tell you a little trick. I googled inches calculator, and it brings up a website where you just type in all your measurements and it gives you the exact measurement down to the inch and fraction. It's very handy when building cabinets. I use a stop block here to ensure that all 4 pieces would be exactly the same length. This is going to help when we start gluing everything together, and these are used to square up the cabinet. With all of our pieces cut, it's time to run some grooves. I set up a dado stack to cut a dado that's 11/16 wide, aka the same width of the plywood, and then I ran a test piece through just to make sure that it was going to fit. So using the test piece in a scrap that I had, I went and test fitted the groove that's going to be for my panels, just to make sure it's nice and snug. You want very little slop in here, and this will ensure that the cabinet's nice and square. As you can see, it's a friction fit and won't come out from shaking it around. I also test the gap to make sure it's deep enough. I use a 1/4 inch setup block, and perfect. 1/4 inch groove. When you set up to run your dados, it's important that you don't rely on the ruler that's attached to your fence and your saw. Since that ruler is only calibrated to a single blade, it would only be reading from the far left-hand side of the dado stack. So it's very important to use a tape measure and measure the actual distance between the fence and the workpiece so you know where your groove is going to be. I went with 3 3/4 because that's how tall my toe kick is going to be, and I want the bottom panel right at the top of the toe kick. Next, I sand down the inside of the cabinet just to 120. It doesn't have to be sanded to finish grade because this cabinet is going to be full of drawers and nobody's going to see the inside. Furthermore, I'm not going to put a back panel on it for the same reason. No one's going to look inside of it to see that there isn't one. We'll just use a couple of stretchers in the back as nailers, and then we could just screw it into the wall. Here I am measuring for where my toe kick is going to be. I'm going with a 3 3/4 inch tall by 3 inch deep toe kick, just to match the current toe kicks that are in my kitchen. With my toe kicks marked, it's time to cut them out. Here I'm going to use my track saw to cut most of the way through, and then finish with a flush trim saw. You can use a jigsaw or your table saw for this if you don't have a track saw. I just figured this would be the quickest and easiest way to do it. Once I made both cuts, I took my flush trim saw and just cut out the little piece in between. With everything cut and ready to go, it's time to do the glue up. I put a very thin bead of Type Bond 3 inside that groove on both the side panels, and then I went and fit the bottom panel right in there. I didn't feel the need to use any right angle clamps when I clamped this up because everything I cut was very square. And once I add the stringers to the top and back during the glue up, it's really going to hold everything square, and we're not going to have to worry about it. I get a lot of questions about these orange clamps, and they're made by Bora. I buy them on Amazon. You could buy them individually or in kits, and I have about 8 of these for my 24-inch to 43-inch clamps. I'll put a link in the description if you're interested in checking them out. You don't have to use parallel clamps for a glue up like this. You can use F-style clamps or pipe clamps or whatever you have, but I do a lot of tables, so I have a lot of parallel clamps for gluing up panels, so I just use those because they're available. Here I am putting some of those 4-inch pieces in the top for stretchers, or attempting to at least. I've already pre-drilled these with pocket holes, and I'll use pocket hole screws to attach them to the plywood. Pocket holes come in very handy when you're building cabinets. Once everything's in clamps, I'll go ahead and attach those stringers with the pocket holes. The pocket hole screws will be sufficient to hold them in place, so I'm not going to put any glue on those. If you're going to use an impact driver to put pocket hole screws in, and it's an adjustable strength driver, I always put it on the lowest setting, or sometimes a medium setting, and just tighten until I hear 1 or 2 clicks of the impact mechanism. You don't want to overdrive these screws because then you'll just strip the hole and they'll never hold. Once everything's tightened down, I check for square on a couple of corners, and as promised, it is right on. Next it's time to face frame. So I measure for the 2 vertical pieces, also known as the stiles. Once I get those cut, I'm going to secure them in place with clamps right where I think I'm going to want to fasten them permanently. I usually leave a slight overhang on the outside of the cabinet, so that way I can come back with my router and flush everything up. Then I put any wood filler I need and then sand it. But you'll see that in a little bit. With the stiles clamped in place, I go ahead and measure for my rails. Now if you did your job up to this point, your measurements are going to be the same. For this cabinet, I'm going to need 4 rails. 1 top, 1 bottom, and 2 in between the 3 shelves. Once again, I go to the internet and have the calculator do some math and figure out the spacing between my shelves. I then cut a couple spacers, so that way I can space them out all perfectly. And then secure everything down with glue and pocket screws. And there you have it, one nice straight face frame. Once that's glued together, I put a thin bead of glue on the face of the cabinet. Then I take my face frame and lay it into place. Since we're painting this, I'm just going to secure it in place with 18 gauge brad nails. Then I can go ahead and fill everything up and sand it down. Here I am putting a nail about every 6 or 8 inches. Once everything's secured, I grab my trim router and use a flush trim bit to flush up the side of the face frame with the outside of the cabinet. After you go through with the router, or just sanding that down, you can then see any more imperfections that might need some wood filler. I then take that opportunity to apply the filler to both the joint between the face frame and the cabinets, as well as all the nail holes in the face frame. Once this has a chance to dry, I'll start sanding with 120 and work my way all the way up to 220 grit. Once I sanded off all the wood filler, I go ahead and sand the entire box all the way up to 220. For this, I would start with 120, go to 150, 180, then 220. I hope you enjoyed this video. This is a really simple build using just 1 sheet of Baltic birch plywood and some 3/4 inch poplar that I had in the shop. If you want to see how I'm going to make drawers for this cabinet and get them installed, stay tuned till next week when I'm going to have that video coming out. I hope you enjoyed this, and if you found it useful, please make sure you like it and subscribe to the channel. Thanks again for watching.